So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. I know, especially with people who are joining from India, it's quite getting late in the evening, and I think there's people from the US as well, early morning, and I'm sure you're all watching the news or has the option to watch the news rather than be part of this session. So hopefully we can definitely add more value than what's going on in the news. So quickly to introduce Upaya, we are an early stage impact investor, and we proudly say that we are an impact first investor, and we showcase that by getting in depth in terms of how we track and measure data, especially around impact. And that's what we want to try and do with this session, is to showcase how Upaya tracks its impact, especially around jobs. We plan to make this an interactive session. My colleague Rachna, who heads impact management for Upaya in India, will be leading the session. And so I hope everybody will participate. We've breakout room sessions planned as well. So over to you, Rachna.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Since we already have the introductions, I'm going to jump right in. For today's session, and in the first part of the session, what we're going to be doing is talking about how Upaya assesses the quality as well as the dignity of jobs. And I think we'll also look at or try and understand why it's even more relevant in the current context. And what we also want to do is try and explore what we can do better to be able to achieve our mission. A large part of the session and the next part of the session would be around discussing with everyone here and asking you all to kind of share your perspectives on a few key questions that we sort of have been asking ourselves as well. And I do invite all of you to participate as actively as possible so that collectively as a group, we are able to put together some insights and also share some best practices. So what we want to be able to achieve for the session today, and I'm putting this up so that you can hold us accountable and we can hold ourselves accountable, that you guys go back with at least understanding or having a sense of the kind of indicators that you guys could use to assess the quality and dignity of jobs. And the other bit is also understand best practices from peer organizations in terms of what we're looking to do going forward as well. Before I jump into the presentation about Upaya, I think let's take a quick poll to understand who's in the room. Yeah, I would request everyone to kind of select the option that or category that you're part of. Great. So I guess a large chunk of the audience are supporting organizations like incubators and accelerators, and we also have donors, foundations, and other investors. And I hope that this will give you some insight in terms of how you guys can look at tracking some of these indicators through the organizations you support as well. Aditi, could you stop sharing the poll? Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to jump right in now. So just to kick things off, I think we're all here today because we do understand the importance and relevance of jobs and livelihoods and its ability to kind of fight poverty, which becomes even more relevant in the current context. And I think with a large chunk of us being intermediary organizations here, I think we also understand that SGBs that we primarily look to support have a crucial relevance in making this happen as well. For those of you who are new to Upaya, here's a quick snapshot about our model. As Alex mentioned earlier, uh, we are basically we basically work with SGBs to provide acceleration and seed funding to entrepreneurs that are looking to create jobs for the extreme poor. And over the last 10 years, we have invested in about 23 companies and created over 16,000 jobs. So before we talk about the process of how we do our impact measurement, just a quick overview about how we define jobs. And I'm sure a lot of you will agree that there could be many definitions out there, and it's not easy to define what a good job means. But this is something that Upaya has come up with internally based on our experience in this space. And we look at defining a dignified job as a predictable relationship with an enterprise that leads to access to economic improvement to rise above extreme poverty. I think you'll notice that we've sort of embedded the dignity as well as some aspect of the quality in our definition, because I think it's something that we believe is a core focus. And based on our experience in working with uh, businesses over the last few years, we also recognize that the impact of livelihoods is across the value chain of the business, and hence we've tried to categorize these jobs such as full-time, part-time work, which we are looking at as contract work, and organizations that work with, let's say, other micro entrepreneur modules, etc., which we call as livelihood enabled. We also look at tracking indirect jobs and trainees. And I just want to point out that although the last two segments are not included in our job tally, we do recognize the impact that the businesses are creating, and we try and uh, keep track of that as well. So I think in terms of our impact surveys, it does form an important part of the work that we do. And I think it's not simply enough to just keep a track of the job numbers of our portfolio companies. I think what we really need to do is dig deeper to understand if these jobs are actually changing lives of the end beneficiaries or job holders, and if it's actually helping them slowly step out of poverty as well. Uh, so to understand this, we actually undertake impact measurement surveys ourselves directly with the job holders. And till date, we've surveyed about 1,300 job holders with 9 of our portfolio companies. To quickly talk about our method, as I mentioned, we do look at doing impact measurement surveys directly. In fact, it does form one of the requirements when we invest in the company as well, that they allow us to go on site, go on the field, and speak to the job holders directly. And this two and there's two aspects to it. One is, of course, we want to really understand the impact the job is having on the lives and the quality of life of the job holders. The other bit is also to look at or understanding or hearing directly from the job holders in terms of how this particular job has changed their lives. And I think this kind of is one of the unique things that we do, and this is something that we actually put in a lot of time and effort into as well. Of course, so we do work with a third-party agency so that we also are keeping this independent. We've designed the survey in-house based on the indicators we hope to track. And of course, so far we have been doing these surveys on the field directly with the job holders. And given the COVID context, we've had to pivot to doing these surveys on the phone. This is a process that we've just started, and I think so far we have been seeing pretty good results. So here is the gist of the survey questions that we asked. It's broadly categorized into these 4 categories. We do spend a lot of time understanding their income levels individually at a household level as well. We look at understanding their quality of life in terms of looking at what their household conditions are, the education levels, and also ownership of assets. Here on the right, we have a snapshot of the questions that we tend to ask. And I think you'll see that they're pretty straightforward, trying to understand where they are in terms of the basic necessities as well. And it's similar for the other aspects as well. And although and a large portion of our survey actually goes into understanding the income levels and how the additional income is actually helping them either access basic resources, how it's helping them improve their quality of life, how it's helping them improve access to education, nutrition for the next generation as well. So a lot of the examples that I just talked about are the first three categories that we have are pretty objective. But I think we've realized that that in itself is not enough. What we need to do is go a little beyond that as well to assess it from a qualitative perspective. And this is something that we want to hear from our job holders directly as well. And some of the examples here are, and these are questions that we actually ask the job holders, is understanding how stable or reliable they feel the income is as compared to any other previous job they might have had. What are their aspirations and what do they achieve to achieve, what do they want to achieve with this additional income? And we also look at questions like, is this job actually helping them reach their goals, right? And it could be in terms of purchase of household assets or anything else that they want to do as a step up from their current situation. Sometimes it does become difficult because instead of, if you ask them a yes or no question, they might say yes just because of fear of kind of losing their job or something. But if we want to really understand how satisfied they are, we do ask them the question of, would they recommend this to a friend? And so far we've seen that 90% of them actually say yes, which to some extent is an indicator of the fact that this is something that they find relatively more dignified than what they have been doing previously. This is to quickly talk about the fact that we do try and align what the impact management bit to industry standards as well. I particularly want to talk about the poverty probability index, primarily because this is something that we track closely through the surveys that we do. In fact, the PPI questions that are there are actually embedded into our surveys itself. This is an example of some of the data that we have collected so far and how we look to analyze the data that we have. I think on the left-hand side, so you'll see that this kind of tracks the kind of assets they have purchased post the jobs with the portfolio companies. And we've also looked at an average increase in household income of 94% when through the surveys that we've done. The other bit on the qualitative aspect is looking at what do they hope to achieve with the new income that they have. And I think it's interesting to see that one, of course, the most obvious is being able to improve their household conditions, but a lot of them also want to save up for emergencies, which speaks a lot to the fact that in situations like a pandemic, they at least have a little bit of savings to potentially fall back on. So I'm going to pause here because this is an overview of what we do at Apaya, and I just want to check with the group if you have any questions for us before I move into the next segment.
There are a couple of questions that have come in through the chat. Rachna, do you want me to read those out for you?
Sure. Yes, please.
Yes. So I think one question from Laura, which you answered through the presentation, were, are these questions, the survey questions, based on the PPI index? Which
so
you mentioned.
Our survey includes the PPI questions as well, but we have other questions also that speak to some of the other indicators that we want to track. So it's PPI plus other questions.
Right. The next question is from Matt. Cost is always a major issue when talking about third-party enumeration. Curious to hear about how Upaya has managed to make that work.
Can I request Alex to take this up?
Sure. So there is a cost involved, and that's a cost that we are willing to pay. We had to actually search quite a bit to find an agency that could do it at a cost-effective manner. Luckily for us, they were a reasonably new firm who understood and wanted to build a relationship with Upaya, and we've been working with them for the last 3 years. So one, definitely there is a cost involved. I think it's about finding the right partner who can do the survey and understand why the surveys are being done. And end of the day, internally, we make sure that we do budget the cost for doing the surveys through a third party. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, and I think to add to that as well, I think we are a donor-led organization. I guess we've been lucky enough to have donors to understand the importance of this, and hence we're able to allocate resources to be able to do these in-depth surveys with our portfolio companies.
Right. So the next question is from Renata. What percentage of the beneficiaries do you usually survey?
So that really depends on the total size that we have. We do invest in companies at an early stage. So for some of the companies, the direct job holders are just maybe like around 100 or just a couple of hundred, and we are able to do surveys with all of them. But with larger numbers, we look at least taking about a 30 to 40% sample on an average.
I do want to check with you in the interest of time. Do you want to take one more question and then we can compile them and have them answered and shared post the session?
Sure. Or is it okay if I just get into the breakout room discussion? I think, yeah, I just noticed the time as well.
Okay with you. Maybe we can do one question and then jump into that. We can change the session.
Sure. Yeah, that's okay.
This question is from Laura again. So you mentioned that you do a baseline, midline, and an end line. What is the general timing of these? Is it in line with the acceleration program, or is it on some other timeline?
So these surveys that we do are specifically for our portfolio companies. So after we've invested in them, we do initial baseline within about a month or so of them being onboarded as part of our portfolio. We do a midline about 2 years later, and an end line then follows after that as well.
Sure. Thanks, Rachna. I think we can go ahead to the next part of the session. To the others, just to note that we will attempt to get these answered from the panel, from the presenters, and try and share this with you in a post-conference summary. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you, guys, and thank you, Sai Priya. So to move into the next part of the session, what we will do is go into breakout groups to discuss some of the prompts that I will share. But before that, I just wanted to set context. I think one of the reasons we're here also is to explore what has changed in the current context when we're looking at measuring impact of jobs, and what is it that we need to do differently. So even at Upaya, these are the questions that we've been asking ourselves over the last few months. And while we are in the process of working on some of it and building on that, we also wanted to hear from everyone in terms of where they are at. Quickly, before we get into that, I don't think I need to really talk about the impact this whole pandemic has had on the labor force. These are just some of the stats that we've seen coming up out from reports from the World Bank, United Nations, and other reports which basically state that nearly 500 million workers are at risk of being adversely affected and facing loss of livelihoods. So I think in this context, one of the big questions that we need to ask ourselves is, going forward, how do we ensure the sustainability of jobs or income to ensure people don't actually slip back into poverty? I think we've been seeing that a lot. What do we need to do differently to ensure that people are building better resilience in cases of in the current context or similar situations in the future? And then within that context, how do we then define the dignity and resilience when it comes to job? What are some of the additional aspects that we need to consider? So what I would request you all when we go into the breakout rooms is talk about these three questions that I'm going to share with you. One is, of course, understanding from everyone is what are the current methods for measuring the quality and dignity of jobs? Like, what is the data that you guys collect? How do you collect them? And how do you kind of look at measuring both the positive as well as the negative impact that they might be experiencing? Question two is around understanding the challenges and gaps in the current context. And I think more importantly, what are the key questions that need to be answered? And how do you plan to then use those answers to make programmatic changes going forward? The third one is around what needs to be done differently. What would you add or completely reassess in your case? And are there any specific aspects you would consider to assess the sustainability of jobs going forward? I'm going to put these questions up later again, but just quickly in terms of how we are going to do the breakout rooms is, we're going to get into 3 different rooms that all participants can choose the breakout room that you want to get into and discuss. There will be a Google Doc link that will be shared with you in the chat box where we can capture the notes and insights from the discussions. We will have team members also help you facilitate and help facilitate the discussion if needed. I would request everyone to maybe spend the initial few minutes to put down your thoughts in response to the prompts that have been asked, and then spend some time actually discussing with each other on that aspect. And if you also want to ask clarifying questions or seek more information from each other, please feel free to do that. What we'll also do is then regroup, and I will request each group to present some of the insights or learnings from the discussion as well. So if you guys, within the groups, if you guys want to assign one particular person who will then present to the larger group, that will be great. So Aditi, should we look at setting up the breakout rooms? I hope you guys have had some really interesting discussions, and I hope you're also able to learn from what the other organizations are doing. What I'd like us to do over the next 7 to 10 minutes is for each of the groups to kind of share some of the insights and learnings from the discussions. And we'll also use this time to maybe ask more questions of each other if you guys want to clarify any aspect of it. So we'll start with group number 1. And the question that we're asking here is just basically, what were some of the key insights on the indicators for assessing quality and dignity of jobs that you guys were able to come up with? And sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Rachna.
I can stop sharing this screen and maybe pull up the Google Doc that we were using.
Sure. So I think when we were just quickly doing introductions within the room, one of the things that came out clearly was beyond collecting number of jobs, very few organizations were digging deeper and finding about the quality and dignity of jobs as such, and the room wanted to learn more about how it is done. In terms of the data or information collected, as you can see in this sheet, almost everyone collects sort of job numbers, so number of jobs, and then specifically around sort of gender as well. And on a high level, some level of job satisfaction to assess the quality. And I think the group, we also looked at a lot of qualitative data, more than quantitative data is what was agreed that was being collected. In terms of how the collection is done, it's a combination of sort of online surveys, telephonic, and face-to-face. And I think sort of the last question of, measuring or quantifying both positive and negative. To be honest, I think most of us, it's a combination of, baseline and endline, but we didn't get a really good opportunity to present. Let me stop there and just open it up to anybody from group one, because we didn't get time to nominate one person. So I sort of took responsibility, but yeah, if there's anybody from group one that would like to add more, feel free.
Hi, this is Vivekanandan from IntelliCap. We recently concluded a project for Siemens where we were trying to establish a job creation potential, quality job creation potential among social enterprises in Africa, and we were brainstorming among ourselves what should be a quality job, right? So just wanted to highlight the parameters in that sheet. One, we thought there should be a social security provisions within that job. Two, there should be on-job upskilling opportunity within the job. Three, there should be a work-life balance and maternity provision for women employees. So probably those aspects define a qualitative job. So that's the outcome of our brainstorming. So wanted to share it with the larger group here. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing that, Vivekanandan. And I think those are extremely relevant parameters. And I'm sure if organizations are already not doing it, we'll probably look to move in that direction, especially in terms of social security related aspects. I'm going to move on to the next group now. So I think the next question discussion was around addressing challenges and gaps. So what I want to ask the group is, when you guys were discussing it, are we collectively exploring similar questions that need to be answered in the current context? And then also maybe speak a little bit to how do you plan to use these answers to further the impact as well? Can I request someone from group 2 to share the insights from the discussion?
I will give it a go, seeing that I was being OCD with putting the answers in order. So I think, when we look across the sort of questions that were posed, what are the challenges, what are the questions that need to be answered in the context, and how do we plan to use answers to make programmatic changes? We followed thematically more or less the sort of same thing, where we said that it really is about being responsive and mindful of being inclusive as well. That survival of business is important, as well as to factor in who pays for the cost of data collection. And as was mentioned in the previous point, there's a need to almost look at how do you ensure social security for those that are employed. I think the other part that was important in terms of questions that need to be answered in the current context is to fully understand who's affected by unemployment. So what is the true cost of unemployment brought about by the pandemic, and who's affected by it? So we had some sections of the team saying that it's worse for sort of vulnerable groups such as women, the elderly, as well as children, and also to almost look at metrics that have worsened or progress that has been wiped out as a result. So in other words, any progress that has been made pre-COVID may now be, I guess, wiped out because of COVID. And then what surfaces as well beyond that is the need for relief efforts in programs, not to just do what they normally do, but be humane in how they respond to working with the program participants. In relation to how do you plan to use the data, it was important for us to actually say that it's now an opportunity to fully understand who you're working with. Before, the pre-COVID reality was, it's almost the programs are designed around a particular purpose before it's around a particular person, whereas now the person comes through almost as important as the purpose. So it's almost like we become more mindful of who our beneficiaries are and how they could be effective, and therefore need to work alongside that to deliver something that's responsive and impactful in that kind of way. And also just to be mindful of the gaps that may be occurring. So maybe you've been running programs that have had an education focus or skills development focus, but there's other aspects of it, such as maybe internet access, for example, if you've run something digitally. So you may assume that all your beneficiaries have internet access, but this is something you may need to cater for as well. And then I think what's also very important is to now reflect on how data is collected and shared. Is it just with investors, or does it need to be more stakeholder inclusive? And I think right now, everyone is kind of in different ways affected. It's now about understanding that full value chain of development, as opposed to reporting up towards donors and funders for accountability purposes. It's actually reporting down and horizontally and in all directions, so that collectively we make sense of what we're collecting, why we're collecting, and develop that sort of collective response to the pandemic from an entrepreneurship perspective.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I see some really pertinent questions there that came up in the group. And I think it's great to see that you guys also kind of discussed possible ways to go about it in terms of coming up with solutions as well. I'm going to request the third group now to share some of the insights from the discussion. So this is primarily speaking to what needs to change in the current context that we're in.
Sure, I'll speak quickly to that because I know we're about at time. A lot of focus on stability. So in addition to kind of shifting the focus a little bit from, are the job, like what the job is offering in terms of skills and development, to more about stability of the job and whether it's kind of helping produce, so both in terms of the job itself and also whether the job is helping produce some sort of safety net in the form of savings or other services that can be purchased with the income to offer a safety net. More of a focus on resilience, more of a focus on awareness and financial literacy and kind of how to smooth income. So those were things that kind of, within the context of job quality, thinking about, well, do we shift the focus a little bit towards these things rather than some of the, what you might call higher order benefits of jobs. And then in terms of kind of processes, just thinking about, what data, as you think about data over time, like what data is still useful? Do you really kind of need to start with the pandemic and reset a little bit there? Or can you still use some of that data from beforehand? So yeah, those are I think the main focus of our group. So anybody else in that group can feel free to chime in.
Sure. Thanks so much, Matt. And I think this was a good start. And the whole, sorry, yes.
Yeah, Suchi here. Just to say, I think Nancy's had a burning question because I saw her bring this up in chat. And it was on the group where we discussed it as well. So I maybe want to give her an opportunity to unmute and share. So her question was, as entrepreneurs, when we're actually trying to just survive, should we be spending time looking at survival as against some of these more nuanced? And I know I'm summarizing. So Nancy, I might not have done as good a job. Do you want to unmute and jump in for a minute?
Sure, thank you. Hi, Rachna. I guess this was sort of coming from interacting with a lot of enterprises. I'm sure you have as well in the working group, right? So basically the question that comes in always, and especially in COVID, it has been, of course, inclusion and investing in the quality of jobs is important. But right now, for so many of small and growth stage enterprises, survival is at stake. So currently, how do they prioritize and sort of think about quality of jobs where there's so much to just fight for in terms of survival. So how do they prioritize it? And sort of that is one of the challenges that we face while talking about inclusion or having better quality jobs, or even being transparent about your value chain, as you talked about, right? Multiple ways that our enterprise employs people, be it full-time, part-time, contract, etc. So yeah, that was just a thought, and I just wanted to hear perspective on that. Yeah.
Sure, and thanks for bringing that up, Nancy. I think it's extremely relevant. So when the pandemic hit, when we were looking to figure out how to support the companies in our portfolio, the first thing was on survival. Um, so, I mean, we tried to work closely with the portfolio companies to provide them with additional resources or anything else that they might require to even uh, continue or or just continue with the basic aspects of their business if it was possible. But what we saw at least in our portfolio companies, that their focus was also ensuring that the workers and the staff that they have, how do they continue to support them, even if business operations have come to a standstill. So as an investor, our first priority was to figure out how to ensure that the businesses survive. And I think that obviously should be a priority. When it comes to impact management around all of these things, we as investors kind of took the initiative to be able to collect data on the quality of jobs. And this is something that we've been doing in the past as well. And even during the pandemic, when we did our COVID related surveys, it was something that we took the ownership of. And we were very cognizant of the fact that the entrepreneurs and the leadership team from the organizations really don't have to spend time on that. So I think, long story short, I think it's important for enterprises to focus on what is most relevant right now. And this is something that needs to be, in terms of quality, it needs to be something that gets built out over a period of time. I hope that gives you some context in terms of where we were coming from when we're talking about this as well.
No, sure, that helps. Thanks, Rachna.
Great. So I've been told we are at time, so I will quickly look at wrapping up. For everyone who participated in the breakout group discussions, thank you so much, and thanks for sharing your insights. I thought I would leave some time for Q&A, but I think that's something that we could get back to you for sure if you've already put your questions in the chat box. What I wanted to maybe just take about 30 seconds to talk about is just based on the questions that Upaya has been kind of asking internally, these are some of the things that we're looking to dig deeper into. This is an aspect that we already are tracking with our portfolio companies, but I think just like a lot of you shared, how do we look at better stability? How do you look at building resilience? And also for us, we also realize this whole step about getting out of poverty is a cycle that might take some time. So we're also looking at how does this impact the next generation as well. This is just a starting point for us, and we're looking to explore on this further. And we look forward to kind of engaging with all of you as well to figure out what are some of the best practices and how we can improve our data collection around this as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope we can all stay connected and take these conversations further as well.